Hello, everyone in chat. Guess what? We can talk to you. How you doing? I hope you're happy. Hope you're having a good day. Hope you enjoyed B's stream. Um, we had. We're gonna have a good time this evening. We're gonna talk about a few things D&D related because guess what? The entire community, which B should be familiar with this with her experience with other communities, has been blowing up this week really, really badly. So,
Well, the D&D community.
Yeah,
Why?
yeah. So,
because of the license,
yeah. So what?
open gaming license. They're
So-
trying to undo it.
Yeah. So what's happened is D&D last month announced that they were, well, maybe it was 2 months ago now, announced that they were going to go forward with a new edition that was going to replace 5th edition. They're not calling it an edition.
What do we play?
It's called, we play 5th edition. It's called 1D&D. And the idea that they've had is they're going to merge everything into this 1D&D. The other thing they were going to do is, and the reason why they've basically taken control of D&D Beyond is they're going to have a version of the game that we could do where you could literally have a 3D game like Roll20, but you'd be able to move pieces around and such, more like an actual game if you were playing it on the table. Which
Right.
sounds great, but there's a little side effects to all this as I've been finding out about it. So the first thing is that apparently part of this deal will be is if the DM specifically wants to use this, every bit of it will cost money. So in other words,
Right.
the mapping will cost money, the characters will cost money. If you want to have other than certain races, it'll cost money, which now that's somewhat not true. Because all you really need to start the game is the player's handbook and the DM's guide. And I would always traditionally say that the monster manual. All of these books, which we don't publicly use the books, we got PDF versions and such that we have access to. But back in the day, you used to buy I don't know if you can see it now. No, you can't. I have all those books here. So yeah. So anyway, so they've decided to basically turn it into loot boxes. And so that's interesting as well, from everything I understand. So that's made people mad because, of course, they're trying to make more money off of the people who spend all the money on D&D, which is the DMs. Let's be fair. So that's the first part of this whole thing that got people upset. Second thing is, however, is that as a part of D&D, when it was bought out by Wizards of the Coast back in the early 2000s, when they created a new edition of the D&D, which, as I said, we're on 5th edition now. Well, that was when it was 3rd edition. Sorry, I'm going to answer questions in chat if you have any, but give me a minute to explain where we're going. So they made a open license to the game so that anybody who wants to could make supplemental material for the game. So in other words, if you had an idea of a system change, or if you wanted to add races or classes or monsters that you'd used maybe in a game of your own and then published it, you could legally sell it with no problem. There was no, you can't use our name, you can't do this, you can't do that. Like all of the access to that was fine as long as you recognize that it was from this open license. So D&D means Dungeons and Dragons. So that's the name of the tabletop role-playing game. So they offered that out, and in doing so, kept D&D relevant as the main source of tabletop role-playing games. Everybody knows what Dungeons and Dragons is. Almost nobody knows any of the other ones. Unless you're in the community, it's like, like any community, there's internal stuff that everybody knows, and then there's the external stuff that people actually understand, and those are not the same. So this license, this open license, has basically been around since 2000, I think, 2000 or 2001. And in the last 2 months, Wizards of the Coast, are owned by Hasbro, decided that they were going to rewrite this whole thing and put out the license 1.1, which would be basically superseding the previous license, which that previous license said they would never be allowed to do, by the way. And it would also mean that if you made money off of D&D via these supplementary material, you would have to account for every dollar of it to Wizards of the Coast. You would have to tell them exactly how much you're earning, and you would have to do reports, I guess, on an annually basis. It's nuts. And so if you make over 750,000 a year off of them, you have to give Wizards of the Coast 25% of that.
Who's going to make that much money in a year from them?
Well, some of them do. Some of them make some big money. But the thing of it is,
Yeah.
that's not profit. That's just income. So in other words, you've paid your artist to draw the drawings. You've paid your guy to put everything in place. You know, when you get to about $1 million, you're not doing it yourself in your garage. You're having like a lot of different people involved, right? So you've hired a group to work on it. You've got a printer, all this stuff. And basically they've gone, well, we deserve 25% of that. So now and not only 25% of it, but 25% of it before anybody else gets paid. So needless to say, this has a lot of companies super mad.
Do you think that they don't deserve any of it?
I think there is an argument to be made that they should get some reimbursement if people are making over a certain amount. I have no problem with that. Where I have a problem is it should be on revenues after everything, right? So your actual income shouldn't be what it is. Like, it's like saying, like, say you make, off of your videos, you hired a person to edit. You've got a person that creates your thumbnails, and somebody coming along and saying, well, I want 25% of your earnings before you actually paid these people. And that's where I have a problem with it. I think it should be after that, sort of like gross versus net. I think there needs to be some observance of that. I also think 25% is exorbitant.
So, out of curiosity, how do they make their money right now? Because I don't really understand. I'm thinking from a game point of view, but I don't obviously.
No,
I don't really do this, so I don't know how they make their money in the first place.
So Wizards
Like,
people. Go ahead.
People that use the license, they make supplemental books. Even sometimes, like, people will just sell PDFs of new classes that they've created. Like, it's all homebrew stuff, but people actually like make whole books out of it and they sell it. There's actually a big business around it. Like, lots of different people make books. Like, a couple of people I watch on YouTube have their own books that they've done. Like, Critical Role does their own stuff. Like, all of that is from the Open Gaming license. So without it, like, all of that goes away and nobody will.
How did the company that published D&D make their money?
Okay, so Wizards of the Coast, who publish D&D, make their
off
money
the actual
on
books and stuff.
Yeah, make their money on licensed stuff that they do. So 1 second, I'll show you what I'm talking about.
So what I want to ask then is that it's the same thing that I used to say about Overwatch, which is I ended up being correct. Is that a sustainable level of income that is consistent each year and continues to be enough to be able to fundamentally fund the entire company?
To buy all the official D&D books, you'd have to spend well over $1,000 individually. It's almost a couple thousand.
How many people are actually doing that though? Because obviously on the grand scheme, I don't mean that there'll be a lot of people. I mean on the grand scheme, because I'm trying to understand from all perspectives. Overwatch, for example, is one of those games people would buy it, but then you'd very rarely buy loot boxes, and the only time you would really ever pay again is if you were buying like a Smurf account, right? But not many people did that. Only a few people did that. And so I used to say all the time, there is no possible way that they're paying for all these servers to be run and all these websites to be hosted, all this stuff, and managing to actually see a big enough profit margin. Obviously, the company's not going to go bankrupt. They're a huge company, Blizzard. But they're obviously, like any big business, they want to see a regular profit that is superseding how much that they're paying out by a significant margin, right? And so, of course, they've changed to this method now that they've got, which is much more spend your money on us. There's a battle pass every season. There's this all the time to keep that constant revenue coming through.
Yeah.
So what I mean is like, are those books as a one-time purchase enough for having new people regularly reinterested in D&D to keep those purchases to make a large enough profit margin for them to be like, we don't want any of your money, even if you use our licensed content.
Right.
Because that's I'm assuming what is
they come out with books almost every couple of months of official books, and they change. That's why they change versions every couple of years, so that then you have to buy everything all over again.
7 or so years, let's be clear. It's not like it's every couple of years that they change editions, but they do. What they do is they So to clarify some things, one, they've made a lot of money during the pandemic specifically, because obviously they had a bit of a boom due to the financial, the everybody staying home. One of the things that happened was a lot of people started playing D&D.
Yeah, I mean, I think people was really bored, weren't they? So creating your own world kind of escaped from the actual reality.
Exactly. So that was part of it. The other thing is that from the standpoint of the company, so what it is, I would say it's a twofold thing, having watched a lot of people talk about this and kind of my own thoughts about it. One is that they're trying to put out of business competitors. I think that's one thing, because they're looking at them saying they're using all of this that we've given them freely to basically compete against us, and we're not making enough money off of this. Basically, it's not that they're not making money. It's not that it's the perception amongst their shareholders that they're not making enough money. Right. Grant, this is to understand. So if you understand, you understand. If you don't, you don't. This is the same company that owns Magic: The Gathering, who also had this same problem where they decided to leech off of their players to try and earn a bunch of money, and made their player base so mad that people were basically furious at them over it. So it's very much, I don't think people would blame them for finding new ways of making money. I think where people are upset is the fact that it's very obvious that part of their solution is to get rid of the middle guy, because it won't kill the bigger ones, like the Paisos of the world.
No, it'll kill all the small people.
Yeah, it'll kill people who are making just enough money to make it worthwhile.
I think I can visualize. Let me say, if I tell you, I think I can compare it to a gaming industry more standard thing people might understand, and you can tell me if I'm right here. It sounds to me like the thing Nintendo did, where they forced everybody to give 25% of their YouTube video revenue in order to play a Nintendo game on YouTube. That's what it's at. And everybody was like, what the hell? That's ridiculous. We play Minecraft, we play every other game on YouTube just fine. But Nintendo were like, no, you're not playing any of our games for your YouTube video unless you pay us 25% of it, even though you're promoting it to hundreds of thousands of people all the time.
Yeah, and that's the counter argument, right? Because there wouldn't be an explosion of D&D players without things like Critical Role, who are putting out, admittedly, a live stream, which they're not going to take any money from, but it's all the supplementary stuff that Critical Role has done around that now they want a piece of, right?
I mean, arguably, Critical Role will be, and as well as many other smaller streamers too, will be the reason why probably a good 80% of the community play the game, right? Exactly, and buy the stuff and do it in the first place.
Absolutely. That's a large part of the reason why people have actually ever even heard of it, is because somebody said Critical Role. Now with their show on Amazon, even more so, right? Because if you've watched
I personally had never seen Critical Role, and yet I even know. I'm not in the D&D community by any means. I'm just, I just join in, but I still know who Critical Role are, and High Rollers and things like that.
Yeah, so all of these groups, I mean, like I said, so for people like us who are just streaming it, they've said there will be no problem. But the gray area comes is if John working on his world, or if Rob working on his world, or somebody else, B, working on your world, come up with a monster or some change in rules which suddenly becomes worth publishing, then they'll come back at you and say, oh, well, one, that's the other thing on this, which I didn't mention. Anything you publish under the D&D open license, if D&D decides they want it, they take it. And you get no reimbursement for that if you sign off on this license.
Right.
Which is ridiculous.
You know what this sounds like? It's like, I think we have a very complicated relationship as a industry with utilizing other people's platforms and nobody really knowing how to best handle that. A good example of this is Roblox. I don't know if you guys know this, but as a fun fact for you, in case you didn't know this, Roblox take from their creators of all types, whether it's the game creator, certain creator. I'm not allowed to talk about my specific ones. We're not actually allowed to talk about our own contracts, but like, it's well-known public knowledge that game creators, UGC creators, people who make items and clothing or whatever on Roblox keeps 70% of the revenue made by those, even though all they do is host the website that you're posting that content on. You build the whole game, you pay all the developers, you pay the artists, you make the UGC, you use Blender all day, you do all the advertising, all the marketing, everything. And like if I sit here, I pay an artist to make me a custom hat that I have in game, that like bean hat, that dolly hat that I have in game. Users can buy that hat and then wear it on their character. I've put all the work in, I've paid the artist, I've done the marketing, I've advertised it all over my YouTube channel, and still only get 30% of the revenue from it.
Yeah, which is very much a
which
thing
is abhorrent.
Yeah. And this is what people are talking about. They're saying, you know, like what's going on in the gaming, like the video gaming world. They don't want it to come to Dungeons and Dragons. And this is where people are like, please don't bring this here. We don't want you doing this because you think, oh, we see all these other, because it's happening in all sorts of things. If you put a book on Audible, like the audio book reading thing, unless you're a big enough person that you can sign your own deal, the reality of it is anybody just posting an independent book up there, that it's the same problem. They get 30%. So, you know, you're the one who wrote it, you're the one who edited it, you're the one that did the audio recording, but because Audible is the big boy in town, you get 30% of whatever profit they make off of it.
This is the problem, isn't it? It's this whole, we can't use something else because this is all that's provided to us. A great example of this actually is Twitch. But how long now have people been complaining that Twitch still keeps 50% of your subscriber revenue? 50% is a huge amount of your revenue.
Yep.
When YouTube, by default, gives everyone across the board 70% without any kind of unique contract, there should be no excuse as to why Twitch still takes half by default of every single creator's revenue, and the only way you get more is if you have a custom contract, but they don't tell you how you can get that custom contract and keep it limited to specific creators. And I mean, I obviously people probably know already. I have a custom contract with Twitch because but I'm lucky. Mine was purely because I was partnered with a network that already had that custom contract. Otherwise, from what people are aware, you have to have 500 concurrent subscribers, not including gifts, in order to be even considered for that increase of revenue. So they're making sure that they are making plenty of money from you first before they will even consider giving you an increase. And then they announced silly things like the other week, what was it, the other month, they announced they're giving us more ad revenue. 5%. 55% we get now of ad revenue. Oh, wow. That was what we asked for, wasn't it? But then on top of that, they also announced that all the big creators, for us who have custom contracts like me, we'll get our extra percentage. But now I don't make that much. It doesn't matter to me. But for the YouTube Twitch streamers, it does. Once you reach $100,000 earned, you then default back to 50% for anything else you earn after from now on.
Because it's
September
fair.
Yeah. So they basically said that you can have, say you've got a custom contract that says you can have 80% of your revenue, because some people do. You can have that until you reach 100K in a year. Once you reach 100K, everything after that is 50% again.
Yeah.
It's literally the most money-grabbing system you could ever imagine.
Yeah, and you're stuck with it because, let's be honest, there's nowhere else to really go because YouTube's got its own passel of problems, so live streaming on there.
And they just don't have the platform for streaming properly yet on its own.
No. And they may never, because if you look at what their new contract situation is, or their new code that they've developed, they're creating all sorts of new problems for everybody. So I
mean, YouTube right now is very much focused on short form content. They are pushing shorts hard. You can now have them monetized, so that's good. But they really want everybody to be making short form content because TikTok has killed all everybody's attention span.
Yep. And the funny part to me on all that is when you look at like trying to get yourself monetized, they don't actually consider the short watch times actually monetizable as watch times, which makes 0 sense to me. If you're doing all this to get shorts out, why is that not considered watch hours when you're talking about monetization as far as YouTube goes? It's bizarre. But so for all of you that have just joined in and just FYI, so don't worry, we will play D&D at some point here. Not tonight. Just too many people are sick, and we do have one person who's still coming back from work right now. So because of that, I just made the command decision just to not, leave them, having to struggle through this. But if you'd like to watch the episodes that we've done in the past, catch up, you can go over to our YouTube channel. I put it in the chat, youtube.com/distractionsmedia. All of the back episodes of Rocket Care Bryn and our other series, Copper Guardians, are on there, and you can certainly watch them there. So where we do a lot less complaining about D&D. But yeah, so it's frustrating to see this kind of stuff happen because you're like, these kind of communities are so built upon the goodwill of the public. And every time you do this kind of stuff, and it just makes people jaded. And, the funny part of it is they tried to do something back in 2008 when they came out with the 4th edition, which is the one previous to the current one, obviously, in trying to make it easier for people to play, to try and make it more video game-esque. But the problem is that their community that they'd built up over the 3 decades before that had no desire for that, did not want that, had no acceptance of it. And so it created all sorts of animosity, and the entire edition basically fell flat. And in the process of them doing that, one group that had been working with them for a long time called Paizo set up something called Pathfinder, which basically went off the previous system and then they've now diverged into their own version. And they're another group that's going to struggle with this licensing situation a little bit because, of course, they based their original Pathfinder game off of the original license. And since Wizards of the Coast is saying that license doesn't apply anymore, all of a sudden they can, start snatching that money. So it's one of those things where it's really difficult on big creators, small creators, everybody in between. And it's all done basically because corporate greed. I don't know what else to describe it as. And I'm not usually one to go after that, but it really is all that it's about. It's Hasbro, basically. That's the problem. It's not the lower tier people who work on the game on a day-to-day basis or have, experience like so often, right? It's somebody up in a suit who's basically sitting there going, well, our profit margins just aren't big enough. And so we're going to do this, this, and this. And oh, by the way, then we're going to make it really hard for anybody else to compete with us. So then that way we make even more money, not realizing that in the process, what they do is they isolate themselves. They make people, because the big thing with tabletop role-playing games, and I find it in my own case, you go through phases of being really excited and not excited, really excited, not excited. And so if you start to implement things that make people not excited, guess what? They just stop playing. And it's not the kind of thing that you can play on your own, not really. I mean, people have tried, but I don't consider this this kind of gaming to be something you can just do by yourself. So, some people buy it for the pretty books, but I don't think it's that common. So it's kind of frustrating. The whole thing's been very annoying. And the more I see of it, the more I just sit there and go, they're just asking for legal, like being sued a bunch of times because definitions on legalese on all of these contracts are so interesting in how they're interpreted, basically. So, because their argument will be is that the fact that the original license said perpetual doesn't really mean legally it's perpetual, which is goofy as hell, but honestly, that is the way they think of it. And so they'll say, well, yeah, that was perpetual under that system, but now we have a new one and it's not the same. So it's baffling. Oh, apparently we're still publishing our Extra Life goal. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Extra Life.
So, Rob, how do you feel about this whole thing? Because you are really into D&D and stuff and in the community. And how does Webby feel about it? If you know.
Poor Rob, sick boy.
He's dead.
Yeah,
he died.
He might not even be there, all you know.
I mean, he's muted.
Yeah, so he might be dealing.
I had to mute a couple of times when I was coughing, so he might be doing the same.
Possibly.
Oh dear.
Or he might be dealing with dog.
It might be dealing with dog.
Yep. Off topic. How are you liking It Takes Two?
Yeah, I played it before, so I already knew what was coming.
Right. Never mind.
I like it though. It was a while ago, to be fair, so I don't fully remember it from before. But yeah, it's a nice game.
It's fun to watch. I think some of the animation is kind of creepy, but yeah.
There are some like brutal bits in it where I was like,
yeah,
God, that's really intense.
The beetle one I think was kind of sad. Like,
I don't think we've done that. I haven't done it again with Rob yet, but I do know what you mean.
Yeah.
Pushing the elephant off the thing. That was.
Yeah, the elephant.
tearing all of its arms off and everything.
Because they had to like destroy they were trying to make her cry. What kind of mom does that? I was like, oh my god, so stupid.
Yeah, that was a bit brutal.
All right, I want to let Matilda out.
I was right.
Webby said you were asking me something.
I asked you what your opinion is on this whole D&D thing that's going on since you're really integrated.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't mind them like trying to make more money. Obviously, like that's what a lot of people do. But the whole trying to erase the old open license—that's dirty pool, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, agreed.
What about Webby? Does Webby have the same opinion as you?
I actually don't know, but I'm guessing probably.
Well, I mean, Webby's was already tilted that they kept making changes to 5th edition with the way the classes worked and the races worked, and so yeah, I'm sure I'm sure he has an opinion on it.
It sounds rather yikes.
Yeah, well, and I mean, this is the thing, like, okay, so there's a level of nerd, and then there's a level of nerd that's a tabletop role playing nerd. And you're going against these people who very much are, the kind that get pitchforks going at the least thing. And you're going to throw this bomb at them? To me, it just makes no sense at all. But they did it with Magic the Gathering. So they basically came out with, it's 30 years since Magic the Gathering's been developed. So what we're going to do is we're going to republish all of these cards that were the original cards, which sounds really cool until you realize that people make a lot of money off of owning the original cards. So you're basically just reprinting something that is of value to them to make them less valuable. And then on top of that, you're now charging $1,000 for these cards. So people were like fuming. And I mean, I have no dog in that fight. I don't play Magic. I've never have, but I know people were absolutely livid about both of those because it was seen as what it was, which is a cash grab, supposedly celebrating their 30th anniversary. So this kind of feels like that. Like they came out with all this positivity around one D&D. It's not, this version or that version. They're all going to be the same now. They're going to be all under this label of one D&D. And then it's like, oh, but by the way, it's also one D&D. There's none of this sharing to anybody, unless you want to pay us, then you can share out a little bit. So I don't know. It's frustrating to me. Like I said, like Rob said, I don't begrudge them making money. I think that's fair. I grouse at the cost of some of the stuff, but I actually really like D&D Beyond. I think it's a great website. It has a lot of cool stuff on it that I use all the time as a DM. And, having access to the books digitally and being able to access them whenever I want and share them with all of you guys to view them if you want is an advantage that you wouldn't have had before. Like if we were playing in person, right? Or previously before D&D Beyond came around, the only way you would get a copy in the old days is if I had a book and I gave it to you or you bought your own. So trying to look up stuff becomes a real pain in the butt when you have 5 or 6 people around a table and somebody's going, oh, what's the spell for blah, blah? Here, I need the player's handbook. And then somebody has to hand them the player's handbook. Then they spend ages looking for it. And then somebody else is trying to do something. They're like, oh, I need the player's handbook. And so you end up having to buy multiples of it all because otherwise people are just frustrated by it. So it's one of those things where it's like, you feel it really helps. Like it's really helped the digital version of this game because honestly, there's no way we could do a Discord call, have you guys all in this without Roll20 and without, access to these books. And it just frustrates me that they're going to turn around and make it so that people are like hesitant, I guess would be the word I would use, to get involved, which I think is what this will do. I think it will turn off players who played for years. They'll either go back to playing their old editions and ignore the new stuff, which a lot of people did that with when 4.0 came out, or they will just stop playing, and it'll be one of the two. So it's a real a real issue that actually had me earlier last week kind of feeling like, ugh, I don't know if I even want to play the game right now because I'm so mad about this, because it feels like they're just screwing over the people that pay so much money to them for no good reason other than just to make more money, but they'll actually end up making less money. So I don't know. To me, it's just bafflingly stupid, but we all
Sounds
experience
like a
this.
whole thing.
Yeah, and it's that there has been uh, a lot of conflict, shall we say, like to the point where big streamers and big video people who don't even play the game are now talking about it. Like I'm watching, Philip DeFranco is talking about it. You have people who just are not in the community whatsoever are now bringing it up. It's coming out in, the Wall Street Journal and stuff like that. So I mean, it's gone beyond the upset and angry to the whole of the public, and now to me I can't. They always say any news is good news, but I would argue that this kind of news is bad news. So unless you're trying to get rid of it, which I would assume they're not, I don't understand why you would do this. It devalues your share price at least. So if you're looking at it from a pure financial standpoint, why the heck would you do that? But Hasbro is not well known for their really good common sense. I'm just going to say, in my experience of having to deal with them under multiple banners. So,
Interesting to see how they react to people being very much not happy.
Yeah, I mean, they've put out a one-line Twitter post. That's so far as all they've done, saying, we've seen what your comments are. We're going to comment on this, and that's been it. So I don't know how that like stops the fire, and it obviously points out that all the rumors and innuendo and published things that have come out via various media sources must be accurate, because if they weren't, they would be coming around and saying that's not true, that's not accurate, that's they're not doing any of that. So all this stuff that's getting spilt is obviously what they want. So, and it just worries everybody, because once you get to this point, then what? And unfortunately for a lot of creators, the problem is that the only thing that people know is Dungeons and Dragons. If you mention a tabletop role-playing game to someone who's never played it, they might know Dungeons and Dragons. They're not going to know Fate, Vampire the Masquerade, the millions of others that have floated around and been out or gone, depending on the situation, over the 30 or 40 years, I guess 40 to 50 years that it's been around. And so when you have that much public knowledge, if you dick that over it, it does hurt everybody else in the end. Because the guys who play will already know, well, I don't have to play this game, I can go on to a different game. But for other people, like if you've just come upon Dungeons and Dragons from Critical Role, for example, or from High Rollers or any of those other ones, and you didn't really even know the game existed, then, or us, hey, I can say that, then yeah. Agreed. Sorry, somebody just said Paizo wouldn't have had to have made Pathfinder 1E if Wizards of the Coast had published their game license quicker. It's true. All of that, creates an anxiety, I guess, if you're outside of it, looking at it from a standpoint of, it would be nice to actually grow this game. Because if you can't grow the game, if you can't introduce people to it, then you're screwed. I mean, your first introduction to this kind of stuff was Fate, but I can guarantee you 99.9% of people don't even know what a Fate is, other than the actual, definition of it. Talking to B on this occasion, just in case you're all are wondering.
Oh wait, I mean, to be honest, I'm just kind of like, I've been in a world where people are arguing over this type of stuff all the time, with like games making decisions and stuff, and I feel like, sometimes it's really well thought out and fair enough, and sometimes it's like, well, you want to play it, so you gotta just deal with it.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
feel like this one is a very complicated one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially when you have other options which are close enough, You know, like it's not like you can't go and play another game which looks, smells, and tastes a whole lot like Dungeons and Dragons. It's just that if you're new, that's not what you're gonna do. You know, if you've never heard of the game, it's gonna take an amazing amount of work to get another game even close to that level of public knowledge.
Well, the thing with Dungeons and Dragons too is you can continue to play the older versions. You don't have to switch to there are still people that play like second edition, 3.5 edition, fourth edition.
Webby was an example of that. He had a friend group that's all they played was second edition, which was before Wizards of the Coast even owned them. Because they were owned at that point by a company called TSR that went out of business. And that's when Wizards of the Coast snapped them up, who then themselves got snapped up by Hasbro. So anyway, so that's where we are. To heck with Thaco. Yeah, I know. Ooh, there's some insider baseball. Yes, the original way you used to hit people. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so but my point is, like, if people are angered enough by this, no one has to even switch to the first edition. If they have even if they take away the digital copies of 5th edition, a lot of people, I mean, we have the books. People will just stick with the books and be like, oh well.
Yeah,
it's not changing.
No, and I guess what I'm saying is for the population that already plays the game, they don't have to change anything, right? I mean, there was loads of people that stuck at 3.5 when 4.0 came out because they were angry at the way 4.0 came out. But that's different than people who've been making money off the system now basically being turned on by the system. So, yeah, anyway, real positive stuff. I really understand, but it's one of those things where I'm, as you can obviously tell, quite angry about. So it has become a big thing that, Webby's like total Peter Griffin here. What really grinds my gears is that they say that 1D&D was going to be backwards compatible with 5th edition, thus not being a new edition in quotes. But with the new rule set and changes they made, it is not backwards compatible unless you just stick with playing what's currently 5e. Good point about discovery and expansion. Thank you. You can't mix and match the two without one or two being too OP or too underpowered. This is accurate. I mean, that's fair and true. Unless you sit there and basically micromanage fitting stuff in. It's like, for example, when Critical Role started up their own personal game, it was not actually D&D. It was actually Pathfinder. And so when they started their streaming and had to start with Dungeons and Dragons, because again, going back to this is what people know, they actually had to completely change one of the characters to fit within the D&D world because his class was specific to Pathfinder. And so they had to make a bunch of stuff up effectively to make him work. So if you've ever watched the first season of Critical Role's Legends of Vox Machina on Prime, or if you have watched any of their streams of the first campaign, this is a character who has named Percy. He has a gun, and that rule wasn't even, there was no such thing in D&D. You had to make it up basically. And then D&D said, or D&D, got that on my brain. Webby also says, if it were here's some new optional rules you could use, then sure, as a DM, we can make the determination, but they overhauled the whole game system essentially, and it's terrible. Yeah, and I mean, we're not even talking about the actual game itself, which, you know, like Webby says, he doesn't like some of the way the new rules work, doesn't like any of the system. Some of the classes are weird. Some of their decision making about how they're going to change the name from races to something else. What the heck was it called? Cultures or something? I don't remember. It was weird. They decided to change it. So like, it's like, so is a dwarf?
Species, I think.
Species. That's it. And species is a weird classification because species, like an ape, a chimp, and a human are all the same species. So how does that work? So, like, are elves, humans, and dwarves and halflings all the same species? Well, no, because you've said these are, I don't know. It's just weird. Uh, so it's super frustrating. So the whole thing has just been done in such a way that it's just so ham-fisted. But Webby says, again, if I'm a big fan of the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There was nothing wrong with 5e. They shouldn't have touched it, and it's more popular now than it's been in decades. True on both fronts. The game is more popular now than it's been since the 80s. And that was back when it was the deviant thing to play because the devil made it. So all the kids played it.
I mean, I can tell you why they did it. It's the whole money issue. It's because they're running out of things to republish in 5e. Like they just did the Spelljammers, and now they're almost out of material to republish in the new system. So they're like, oh, we need to make more money, change the system. That's what I said. Like John said, and we'll correct it because I said every few years, but like every 7 years or so, when they run out of stuff to publish in the new edition, they're like, time to change editions so we can make more money.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's, I mean, they can do that. I don't have a problem with them doing it. Like, some editions are better than others, and like Rob said, you don't have to play that edition if you don't like it. But I just have a problem with then turning around and saying to other people who are printing stuff based on that system, who may still publish stuff based on that system, that, oh, well, we want 25% of your income because we said so. My favorite part of all this is that they're talking about it possibly, well, they're not talking about it as backwards compatible. It was YouTube that was like, or not backwards compatible, backwards applicable, sorry. Wherein if you publish stuff before it went in place, it's, still applies now, but to this new one, at least they didn't do that, I guess. That's the only positive I can take from it. But that's mostly because you're not going to go to a company and say, oh, by the way, we want your last 4 years of all your budget, and you're going to tell us how much you made, blah, 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 blah. That's the other thing that gets me. It's like, where did they get off saying, oh, we want to see all your money? It's like, what? Okay, I get you don't want to take their word for it. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know. If I'm in business with you and you're doing that, I wouldn't be in business with you long. So, frustrating. The whole thing's just frustrating, and it's so stupid. And they're going to walk it back. You can feel it coming because everything's so negative. They're going to walk it back. But by then, everybody else will have gone, well, we're not working with you anymore. So 1D&D will end up in the same position that 4 ended up in, where people are going to be like, we don't want to play this game. We don't want to publish stuff for this game. That was the problem with 4.0. It actually didn't have these provisions, and so people didn't publish stuff for it. And it wasn't popular. So all of that kind of ran counterintuitive to their ideas. So I don't know why they didn't learn that lesson, considering they just went through this 7 years ago. It's baffling. It's absolutely baffling. The only thing they learned is, well, I guess we better talk to people about the rule set. That's all they've learned. And some would argue they didn't really do that either. So anyway, yes, this is super, super interesting insider baseball, I'm afraid. But if you have any questions, chat-wise or here, please ask, and we will try and answer them if we understand, know, or can answer them. Certainly, I don't understand all the financial workings of it all. The only things I know about are what I've read, and I know for a fact that some of the organizations haven't commented specifically, probably because they've got deals with Wizards of the Coast, which include non-disclosure agreements, so they're not probably allowed to comment, such as Paizo, who on Pathfinder haven't said a word. And the thinking is they've probably got some deal with Wizards that's keeping them off of the list of, paying the full amount. Same with
I saw some people saying that we should boycott the D&D movie, and then other people were like, no, don't boycott the movie because we want more D&D type movies. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how I feel.
Yeah, I know, and people are saying don't buy D&D Beyond, don't, cancel it and stuff. I would say that at this point, I don't... does it punish Wizards of the Coast if there's no D&D content enough to change, or does it just punish the possibility of new people getting involved? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one either. Like I have a bigger agreement with the idea of boycotting D&D Beyond than I would like a film, but because the film's more of an entry point for the public, you know, keep in mind that there's 20 million people that play Dungeons and Dragons in the world, in a world that has 8 billion people, 8 billion people. Whereas probably, if this film does well, there could be up to 1 billion people see it. Like, that's how many more people will be exposed to this than actually watch or play the game itself. So, I don't know. Somebody said, although Pathfinder 2e shouldn't necessarily be compatible with the license, compatible since it's not really even using the same rule set as Pathfinder 1e. From what I understand, you're right. What I understand about it is, though, is then they have to make sure that they go through the book with a fine-tooth comb and eliminate any references to anything that even sounds like Wizards of the Coast version of D&D. Because then that will get them into trouble. Like, you can use things like dwarves and elves and stuff like that because that pre-existed D&D. But, like, probably rule sets, game mechanics, things like that would have to be excised. And I think that's why they've stayed out of this a little bit, is because maybe there are rule sets and game mechanics in it that are pulled from D&D. I mean, D&D is a base game, so it makes sense that people would be pulling things from it to create their own stuff. So it saves you the bother of having to reinvent the wheel necessarily. So I don't know. So anyway, but that's just my own opinion, based on what other people have said about it. I don't actually know. I haven't even, like, I've read Pathfinder 1e, but I never actually read the second one yet. I don't like third edition of D&D, so I don't really want to play Pathfinder based on the fact that it was built around the third edition of D&D. But I will say I used their NPC book at a time, which is pretty cool. They have this little book which they put out a few years ago, which was basically an entire book of NPCs. So it was great if you were having trouble, knowing whom to use for an NPC. But
3.5 was my first D&D game. I liked 3.5.
Yeah, my first one was 2.
3.5 was, I would say, kind of complicated, but it was still pretty fun.
My only problem with it is it got out of control. That's my only problem.
I didn't get to play it long enough because I played it a little bit in high school, and then everyone kind of quit. And then I played it twice in college, but everyone was very weird, so I stopped.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you're coming in at it, just before 4.0 came out?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so that's as people were gearing up with what they thought would be the next big edition, right? So, like everything else, people want to try the new thing until they don't.
I was okay with 4, but I learned recently that a lot of people didn't like 4.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of hatred for 4. I wasn't one of them. I disliked 3.5 and 3, but it was for reasons that I kind of liked 4 from a mentality, but I understood why people didn't like it. And having played 5, I can totally understand why people didn't like it, because wow, it's like night and day. It's like, so for those of you not familiar, and we're talking all these version this, version that. So 4.0, what it was when they recreated D&D after 3, they created it so that you'd have classes and you would choose those classes, and that would actually be as important or more important than your race or species or whatever you want to call it. And all of your magic use or skills were all just kind of things you could do, like in a video game. You know how you have your, like, I can fireball with this key, or I can swing my sword with this key, or, do this with that key. That was all it basically was. You just had these options that you could do. And
it became it became World of Warcraft basically.
Yeah, and it was very, very limiting on any sort of flexibility, because they, rather than flexibility to create your own thing, you were basically constricted for simplicity's sake, I would argue, although how simple it was is anybody's guess. And so, that's when we started playing as a group for Dungeons and Distractions, we were playing 4.0. And at the time, it was the first time I'd played D&D in about 6 years, I think. And so for me, it was nice because I didn't have to think about it. I just did it. But I realized as soon as we started playing 5th edition how much better it was, because not only did you have this, here's your things you can do, but it also said, but flexibility wise, you can do this, you can add this, you can add this, you can add this. But it didn't do it in such a way that I felt in 3rd edition, where basically people went from being random guy walking the street to frickin' Superman in like 5 minutes flat. It was more like you went from being random guy on the street to Spider-Man. And that in and of itself, I think, is a better and more stable system. It made the progress a little bit more sensible, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. And I like it as a game system. And I started out being very nervous about it when Webby presented it to me. I was like, ooh, okay. But I have become quite a defender of it now. I think it's a really great addition, because I think it took the best parts of each of the systems that had come before it and actually worked on it and created it and made it better. But yeah, so anyway, that's kind of where I wanted to go with all this conversation. Rob, you're more than welcome to go at whenever you need to, buddy. Just FYI.
Right. I'm probably gonna go then.
Alrighty.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry I was sick and.
I mean, it's okay. It's okay. It's all about having
Have a good
fun.
night.
So
yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Rob.
Take care,
Bye.
Rob.
Feel better.
Good night.
Feel better.